my name is Jenna. A lot of you know me in the Anglican Diocese of Montreal. I'm here today to talk to you about the Rapha Project that Christian Direction launched and published. So this is a project, community-based research study, actually is what we call it, looking into intimate partner violence and how it plays out in Christian faith communities across the province of Quebec. So when we first started exploring the idea of doing this study, we were just past 2020, it was around 2021, and the rates of femicides in this province were soaring. And so Christian Direction, in its commitment to community engagement and its commitment to partnering with the church for social impact, began asking the question, and we were asked the question by some survivors actually of domestic abuse. This was a project that was brought to us by survivors and said, like, what are you going to do about this? What is the church going to do about this? And so that's when we decided we need to figure out what's actually going on within the church. It's very, very, very understudied as a question. Are faith-believing, church-going Christians, are they facing this issue? How is it being responded to by the church? What resources are available? How do church teachings, church practices, regardless of denomination, tradition, etc., how does that play out in people's understanding of their marriages or in their relationships, in how violence plays out within couples? Do clergy have the training that's necessary? So those are all the questions that we asked. The quantitative data that was published on December 6, 2023, it showed some stuff that was pretty hard to digest. Basically, the summary of it is whatever we're seeing out in society in terms of numbers, in how women especially are facing intimate partner violence within Canada, is pretty much exactly the same, slightly higher, slightly lower within the church. And so in our respondents of our survey, 37% of people self-identified as being victims of domestic abuse at least one point in their lives. And then there was 49% even of respondents who said that they had faced an act of violence within their relationships at some point in their lives. And the people who responded to the survey, these are not just nominal Christians who were baptized as babies. These are church-going. They go to church at least once or twice a month, if not weekly. They are all affiliated and self-identifying as Christians. So it became pretty real for us that intimate partner violence, domestic abuse is an issue faced by Christians in the church. And then in terms of what Christians want from their church in terms of this issue, 84% said they really want intimate partner violence to be taught and spoken publicly about at church. And so Christians are really open to having it talked about from the pulpit, to having posters put up in their bathrooms at church, to having relationships and healthy relationships being discussed within young adult groups and from the chaplains on campuses, to having it as an open and transparent conversation taking place at church or within Christian community. Unfortunately, only 17% of our respondents said that they thought that their church had adequately sensitized or done initiatives to prevent domestic abuse. And so what we're really seeing is, like, we think this is a really important issue, we want to talk about it, but no, we're not doing it to the extent that we think we should. So there's a real discrepancy there. In terms of sad realizations too, after our qualitative interviews with 13 survivors of domestic abuse who were or are still Christian and who were part of a Christian church at the time that abuse was taking place, we received a lot of feedback from those survivors in terms of harmful teachings, harmful practices that were detrimental to their well-being, to their safety, to their spiritual journeys during the times of their abuse. And I won't get into a lot of the details of that. If you think that you want to learn more about that, I would really, really encourage every single person watching this video to go onto our website and to read those reports. They're incredible, incredible testimonials from very brave, very intelligent, very courageous, thoughtful survivors who have so much to say. They were my good teachers, is what I say. I feel like it's one of the privileges of my life to have sat in front of many of them. I was one of the interviewers. My colleagues were other interviewers. To take down those thoughtful words, those meaningful words, those experiences, those testimonials. The women who have been through experiences such as that, they have so much wisdom to impart to the church, and I would encourage every person who feels like they have the bandwidth and the capacity to read some of those difficult stories to do so, and to let those wise words just sit with them. Just be curious about what they've lived. I think it was a very, very meaningful experience in my life to have been exposed to those good teachers. The Canadian government calls domestic abuse a public health issue. We used to say that it's a private family affair, and we now know that that is not true. Why do we call it a public health issue? Because it's when there's a partner who is committing violence against another partner, it doesn't just belong to the two of them. It can be traumatic for the extended family. It can be incredibly damaging for the children. If children witness violence at home and then they replicate that violence in the schoolyard, then it becomes an issue that the school has to deal with. If someone has to miss work days or they have mental health issues following episodes of violence, well, that becomes an economic issue. It's collectively harmful for all of us. And I think as Christians, as we are on our journeys of discovering what it is to walk in Jesus' ways, what is it to live according to Christ-centered love and Christ-centered values, and this is something we heard over and over and over again from the survivors. We need to think collectively of intimate partner violence as not just being a public health issue as said by our government, but it's also a church health issue. And every person who does work on themselves to understand Christ-centered love, to understand and live out values of good, healthy relationship, to work on one's own trauma in order to become a more healed and whole person as Christ desires for us. This makes for healthier people and a healthier church. And so I would say, actually, that working on oneself and working within a community on those values of true, real, radical, healthy love, true healing from trauma, real transparency and being able to say, this is going on in my life and I need help. Knowing that you can come to community if you are in an unsafe situation and being warmly and truly received by community without shame, and making sure that your safety is taken as a highest priority. This is what I call a community of mercy, and sometimes we don't have it in our church, but it's every person's responsibility, and I would say mission, to find those people and create your communities of mercy. So that is actually one of the messages I do want to impart every time I present the Rapha Project to people, is create or find your communities of mercy and become those people who are walking the path of sanctification, which looks like whole healing and living into Christ's message of real, forgiving, healthy love. We are made for safety. So that's the first message is let's really reflect on Christ's love and what that means for ourselves and for our communities. The second, I think, really important message is to talk about really hard issues within our churches without shame. We received so many stories from women in terms of what they felt was being received. Like every time they divulged what was going on, every time they disclosed, every time they were brave enough to try and confide in somebody, and the fear was always that they were going to be met with judgment and with shame. And we need to find ways in our communities, and I really think that the church can work on this. We need to find ways to talk about difficult things, our embarrassments, our fears, our traumas, our issues of safety. We need to find ways to talk about that without a culture of gossip, without a culture of shame, and without a culture of judgment. And that is something that really needs to be carefully reflected on from the part of our clergy, first and foremost, and then from those of our volunteers, and then just individually. We need to hold each other accountable to make sure that we are not a culture of gossip or of shame. The third thing is really honestly, I hear this a lot. People are afraid of talking about it because they feel like they don't have the expertise. But I think there's something interesting going on in society right now where we are, like, our social services, our health services, our public health services, like, everyone's sort of mandating that we just become a little bit more knowledgeable, even as amateurs, on relationships or on domestic violence, because that Good Samaritan approach where you just want to make sure you don't have to be a criminologist, you don't have to be a licensed therapist, you don't have to be a registered nurse just to gain a little bit of knowledge. This doesn't mean that you're responsible now to become an expert. By all means, find those resources in your neighborhoods. Figure out if you need to refer somebody. SOS Violence Conjugale is an incredible service that we have in Quebec. They have 24-hour chat line, text line, phone call services. They have so much resources on their website. It's accessible. They make it really user-friendly, and they make, like, what is domestic violence 101? Go to that website. They will inform you. So at this point, anybody can be doing just a little bit of reading, listening to some podcasts, watching a few videos just to gain some basic knowledge. For instance, we used to think that domestic abuse was only one thing. It was physical. And now we know it takes many different forms. You don't have to be a PhD in criminology to know this. You can actually get informed about stuff like that just by watching some podcasts. Or listening to some podcasts. So I would say that my third, wish for the church would be for everybody just to listen to a few stories, to read a few really accessible books. And again, this is not so that you become the be-all, end-all of experts. By all means, don't say that. Don't say just because you've read a few books, you're now an expert. But just you've broadened your horizons a bit. And that way, if, God forbid, one day someone comes to you and tells you, it could be your kid, it could be your neighbor, it could be someone at church, there's something weird going on in my relationship, can I talk to you about it? Or, my partner said this thing to me the other day. You might have just a few more instincts that will say, like, I'd love to listen to you about that. How can I help you? What would you like from me? Thank you so much for sharing. These are precious, precious phrases that we can give to our neighbor. And actually, it goes beyond intimate partner violence or domestic abuse. It goes into all sorts of areas of life: mental health, childhood trauma, financial difficulties, addiction. I think the posture of being able to just be able to say, I'd love to listen to you. Thank you so much for sharing this. How can I pray for you? What do you need from me? I think these are all really, really beautiful phrases that we can use on each other and create those communities of mercy. So, okay, here's some actionables. Go on to our website. If you like, read the studies. So that's www.direction.ca/Rapha, R-A-P-H-A. Rapha, by the way, is the Hebrew word for healing. We've got lots of resources on that website. We have some really cool interns that put together a database of resources. Broaden your horizons in terms of thinking about what it means to be a person who is healthily pursuing Christ-centered love. So right now, I'm reading All About Love, New Visions by Bell Hooks. The late Bell Hooks was a wonderful writer, a wonderful philosopher, and she asks just some incredible questions about what it means to be in the 21st century and thinking about love and what is it that we need as modern human beings in love. And she thinks about it through the lens of women, and then she writes stuff for men, and then she wrote things for the communities, the BIPOC communities, and it just really asks really good, relevant questions. It's not even a Christian resource, philosophical resource, although she was influenced by Christian theology. I'm also listening to an amazing podcast by Dr. Hilary McBride called Holy Hurt. It sort of reads like an audiobook. And she does a large series where she pedagogically unpacks spiritual trauma. And so it goes, again, beyond intimate partner violence, but just helps people think through just the ABCs of mental health for people and mental health well-being for people who have gone through trauma. And she goes through a lot of spiritual exercises and theological concepts, and she is a very talented, licensed, trustworthy psychologist. So those are just some of the resources that I've been exposing myself to. I make it one of my homework pieces in life now to just be broadening my horizons, reading, listening, considering things that I hadn't thought about. And I think that that's, just part of my ongoing journey of learning. And so my hope for anybody watching this video is that you too will join me on this ongoing journey of learning, and that we understand that the issue of domestic violence or intimate partner violence goes far beyond just the cases in front of us, but it goes into something that is much more large for the body of Christ.